Welcome back to another episode of Explain Yourself. I'm still at the Ecology Society of America meeting, and I made friends with Bianca Charbonneau from the University of Pennsylvania. So we're going to talk to her about her research, which I think is really fascinating. So thank you for coming on the interview segment. This is super exciting. We already talked a lot about your research, but I'm excited to be able to share it with other people because I think it's really cool. So could you give us just the elevator pitch version of your current research?
Yeah, the quickest way to say what I do is that I study how dunes ecologically respond to and recover in the event of storm and disturbance events. So nor'easters, hurricanes, extreme wind, even winter storms, and more specifically within that, what abiotic conditions, and those are just non-living things, so the weather versus biotic or living things, so maybe fungi in the soil, how that impacts how plants come and stabilize dunes after storms when they've been blown away by high winds, and then what the implications of what plant species comes in and does take over a dune area in terms of building the dune back up as a habitat and a barrier to coastal erosion.
Nice. So most people who have been to the beach will have seen or at least heard of sand dunes before, but why do we care about sand dunes?
There's a lot of reasons why we should care about sand dunes. They're really invaluable, whether or not you're familiar with the role of ecosystem services there, which is just the resource that any natural feature has in terms of value that we can assign to it to help us as humans. And as ecosystem services, dunes are absolutely invaluable because they are dynamic buffers to erosion. So they physically block upland areas during storms and thereby reduce the amount of erosion and damage that we have in the event of storms. And they do this because plants stabilize them and build them up over time. And not only that, they're really pretty. They're part of the beach. A beach and a dune you really shouldn't think of as two separate habitats.
Yeah.
The beach habitat itself is much more healthy with the dune system. And there's a lot of really great, unique and plants and animals that you only find on dunes in these habitats. And so they're cool. They serve a really important role both as habitats and to protect us. And you know, we want to keep them in our coastal areas.
Nice. And you said you're interested in the plants that hold dunes in place. So I guess there's this interesting relationship where the dune is the habitat for the plants, but the plants are also sort of ecosystem engineers because they hold the dune in place. So can you talk a little bit more about the relationship between the sand and the soil and the plants that make a dune?
Yeah, it's a bit of a chicken or an egg.
Yeah.
And it's almost that both come at the same time because dune will form when there is a wide enough beach so that sand's going to blow across it, but you also need an obstruction to catch that sand so that it falls and it accumulates. And that's plants serve the best role for that because when the sand falls around them, they're living, and so they grow up out of that. And the roots actually give the individual sand grains structure, so you can think of the roots kind of like a net holding it all together in a big bundle as opposed to individual grains that easily blow away. And so as the plants get buried, they're growing up out of it and the roots are remaining there and stabilizing the sand. And with more time, you get more plants, so the dune's not only getting taller, but it's getting wider and it's blocking the areas behind it so that they're less stressful, so that then we can get even more plants that come in and also more bugs and whatnot that use the habitat because the beach is a really stressful area because of how mobile the sand is and the salt spray coming off of the ocean. And
right.
So having that buffer, that first dune, that foredune, not only protects upland areas as the first line of defense during storms, but it also acts as a barrier to block salt spray so that the areas behind it can be colonized by plants that can't tolerate as stressful conditions as that foredune.
Nice. And you said the first dune, and the way you sort of described, then the sand piles up and the plant keeps growing. So it sounds like dunes might go through some sort of succession, or that sometimes at the beach you can even see like multiple rows of dunes. So how does that work?
Yeah, you'll see multiple mounds of dunes, and the first one closest to the beach is the foredune, and that's the first line of defense during storms. But once you get a fully established foredune, if you have enough sand supply, that dune system is almost going to march towards the ocean, and you're actually going to get a wider beach that is building over time if we have enough sand offshore to do that.
Okay.
Which is depending on your area, and most beaches are actually eroding nowadays, unfortunately, you know. But there are areas that are prograding, which is really exciting. And that's a function of what's available offshore as well as what's transported.
Awesome. So can you tell us a little more specifically what you are looking at in your research beyond the elevator pitch you gave?
Yeah, so I have a number of pins in dunes. I have a number of poles throughout the dune system that are little microscale metrics of what's actually happening in terms of, are these areas having sand eroded away from them or piled on top of them? And relating that to the weather that we see, I'm trying to understand how plants actually capture the sand and demonstrate that they do so by having these poles in areas where we don't have plants, in transition zones in between unvegetated and vegetated areas, and in the vegetated areas. And then I'm looking at what mechanism plants use to come to recolonize these hollow bowl depressions that can form from wind erosion by clipping the youngest plant off of the root system of its parent plants to see how it survives the stressful conditions there. I'm also looking at if fungi that are inherent in the soil, most of the plants in the world rely on arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi to get their phosphorus and maybe help with nitrogen as well, but we tend to focus on phosphorus. A lot of pioneers or foredoomed plants are completely reliant on the fungi, and they're obligate, and so they need the plant host to survive. So in theory, they are or are not in places where we don't have plants, because they can blow in the wind and make their way there, but there has to be a suitable host. So I'm looking at what is and what isn't there in these unvegetated areas to try to understand what mechanisms they can use to recolonize. Do they have to grow back from seed, or can they actually march their way in from rhizomes, which are lateral roots? And then again, the implications are looking at how the shape of the plant shapes the underlying bed form or sand accumulation around the plant.
So different plants have different root shapes, and those root shapes make different nets.
Different plants have different investment in roots and different investment in their shoots or their leaves. And we believe that the shape that they are above ground that you see is what the dune shape will mimic. And so a taller, steeper plant will build a taller, steeper dune over time. And I'm testing that by looking at the baseline of accumulation around a plant with the idea that at the simplest form, if this is true at the large scale of a dune, it should also be true at the simplest form of accumulation around an individual plant. And I'm testing that in the field as well as with a wind tunnel.
Yeah, we're gonna get back to the wind tunnel. I didn't know the thing about the plant shape though. That's really cool. Wow. And you mentioned your poles, but can you tell us more specifically what you just went out and stuck a pole in the ground? Like, what is it for?
Yeah, it's really hard to get the poles in the ground. Sand is really easy to dig down to, a foot or so, but to shove a narrow pole in there is actually really hard. You throw all your weight down, and by knowing how tall the pole is at one period and then how tall it is at another period, if it's shorter, you know that sand has been deposited around it, and so burial has occurred there. But if it's now taller, you know that sand has been eroded away from the base. So it took a lot of trial and error to actually figure out what would stay, because the first time I actually went out and measured these poles, I thought it wasn't going to work. I couldn't find my poles, which were marked by GPS, and I thought someone was up in the dunes. No one should be in the dunes. And taking them until I did a double take on one of the locations where my poles was and realized it was sticking out of the sand, but only an inch. And so I had almost a whole meter of deposition on top of the dune, which I was not expecting. I was shocked by. And so, it's one thing to read that the system is dynamic, and then it's another to go out there and see one of my poles and have it be up to my dog's nose, and then 2 weeks later have it be up to his 6 inches from the top of from the bottom of his collar. So you can really see it visually, and it helps. And we can use drones as well and light our flights, different flights, to get actual elevation. So these poles help me see what's going on at that individual spot. And then I can get a more system view with remote sensing.
Yeah, and that time scale really shows the dramatic changes that these ecosystems go through.
Very dynamic. Arguably the most dynamic terrestrial habitat worldwide.
Yeah, wow.
It's definitely in the running, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's underappreciated. And so it's really incredible that we choose to build our houses in these places that are inherently geologically unstable.
That's a good point. Yeah, everybody likes the coast because it's so picturesque, but that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to try to put a permanent structure on top of.
Yeah, it's tough. My parents always told me it's better to know somebody who lives by the shore than to live by the shore yourself. And I always joke that if there ever becomes the opportunity where a property is suddenly available with no house on it, that I'd like to, and I can afford it, that I would buy it and specifically build a home that I could basically roll in and be there, and it'd be small and I could use when I wanted to. But then if a storm is coming, unhook my water and my electric and
leave. Yeah, like a tiny house.
Yeah, basically.
That would be awesome. I love those.
Well, if you've ever been to places like Seaside Heights, the houses there are already so tiny; they're almost already tiny houses, and so it makes sense. And I think that we're going to have to start thinking like that in the future.
Yeah.
And I know some places already are thinking along those lines of structures that you can pick up and move. So that's exciting.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
It's much more productive probably to be thinking about how we can live in conjunction with the rhythms of the landscape than just being like, well, this is how we're doing it and screw how the environment works, right?
Stronger than the shore doesn't really work.
No.
Nope. Nature will always win, and the better we can do living with nature, I think the happier our whole ecosystem, which we are a part of.
Yes.
Not the lords of, but a part of, will, the better it'll all be.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about your field work. So I like talking with other ecologists because field work can be both fun and frustrating, and we get crazy stories out of it. So what is your favorite thing about your field work?
My favorite thing about my field work, I live two hours away from my field site. And so if I have to get there at sunrise, that means, depending on what time of the year it is, maybe a 4 o'clock wake up. And that's really tough to do. But when I get there, the sunrise over a dune, and as I'm doing my field work, it's quite beautiful. And it's something that people don't get to see because we stay off the dunes. And so I try to take pictures to capture it, and I try to share them. But I think that's my favorite. And also having a dog field hand, that's really fun because he's never doing the same thing. So it's fun to watch him. And it's, I joke that I love long walks staring at the beach because I'm often so close yet so far away.
Yeah.
And it's tough when there's really nice waves, and I'd like to be in the ocean. But, I really do enjoy what I'm doing. Unless there's bugs. I have to deal with greenhead flies, so I have to carefully monitor the wind before I go down. And if it's if the wind is blowing from the land to the ocean, you can't go.
Yeah, way too many bugs. If it's
blowing, too many greenheads, and they go for blood.
Are the bugs your least favorite part of your field work?
They are, the bugs for sure, and this is the first year in the last 5 years that I've been working in this habitat where I've found any ticks, and now it's commonplace. Every time I'm there, I have a tick on me, and so that's a little nerve-wracking.
In the dunes?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
They're pretty bad this year.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot about tick spread as ecosystems and the climate change, but I would never have expected to find them.
Yeah, well, the system gets much more like a forest once you get further from the ocean.
That's
in the maritime forest, as you're getting closer to the bay. And some of my field sites within the actual dune system are closer to that maritime forest. So I think that's where.
Yeah, that would make sense.
That's where I'm running into them, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Huh. And you told me this before, but when you're out doing your field work, you have acquired a fun nickname. So can you tell us the story behind your nickname?
Yeah, so I am the Dune Goon, and I really love that, and I call my dog the Dune Dog. A friend, I posted a picture of the dunes on my Instagram account, which is the Dune Goon, and she commented saying, "You're such a goon. Actually, you're such a dune goon." And I loved it. I told her, it's like, I'm gonna actually use that if you're okay with that. And I've gone by it ever since, and it's been really nice because I almost think that people both take me more seriously and less seriously, depending on who I'm talking to. I think it makes non-scientists feel like I'm more accessible because I'm not taking myself too seriously, and I don't take myself too seriously. And I also think from a science perspective, it really shows that I'm dedicated to what I'm doing, in that I'm willing to say, I'm branding myself the Dune Goon, so I'm willing to answer any questions you have about dunes, and I'm confident that I can handle them.
And so you've got this persona, and you've got your Instagram, like you said, and I know you're also really interested in doing outreach, and the reason I met you in the first place was because you were talking about your sort of interdisciplinary social science aspect to your research. Yeah. So can you talk more about how you do outreach and engagement with people, and how you got interested in the human component of your dune research? Yeah,
I've found that the outreach is probably the easiest part, because I've come to see that people are very passionate about the nature that they're interested in. So the people that use our coasts and visit our coasts, they want to see them persist. And so reaching out to people is very easy it's easy to get them involved. They're not necessarily going to get involved on their own. Obviously people will, but you're going to get a lot better results if you're the one actually reaching out to them. And then they usually get really excited that someone is addressing the questions or doing the things that you're doing. And so I got tied in with a local high school called the Marine Academy of Technology and Environmental Studies. And they explicitly they do a very good job of indoctrinating high school students in the sciences at an early age. It's almost like a charter or magnet school.
Nice.
And I got involved with them very early on. Not that I went there as a high school student, but that was a really great channel for me to reach out to a lot of different outlets because the kids come from all over and they're obviously passionate about what they do. And within that also, our different government organizations as well as NGOs, they want to be part of the solution as well. And so just being willing to put yourself out there and ask questions, knowing no might be an answer, but that no is always the answer if you don't ask the question, really helps. And so I just, I'm never hesitant to ask people what they think about something or if they want to get involved with something. And usually if they can't get involved, they can point you in the direction of somebody who does want to.
Yeah, it's all about making those connections.
Yeah, and I recently had a second grader who emailed me asking me questions about dunes because she was learning about them in her class, and I was shocked and amazed, and she wrote me a better email than most of my undergrads did with the help of her teacher. And I ended up talking to her and the other second grade classes in that school district. And so, it'd be wonderful if you could go back, if I could go forward in time and see if that'll have an impact on any of those little kids down the line. But I think that's the first step, talking to younger people.
Absolutely.
And whittling down your science to very simple components of sand grains bouncing into Tigger bouncing on the beach. Finding ways to do that is really it's a fun skill and a creative side of science.
Yeah, and you did some stuff looking at people's awareness of dune fencing. So can you talk a little bit more about that, and which side of a dune fence are we supposed to walk on?
Yeah, so a lot of science is just noticing things, and I noticed when I was doing a study on the different configurations or ways that we can have fencing to build back dunes. Fencing is just there to mimic plants. It's that obstruction. It's to catch windblown sand. The only thing is it's it's not going to grow up after it's buried, and so you have to reinstall the fencing. And I was looking at how different configurations affect accumulation, and I was noticing that there were a lot of footprints on the slopes in front of these fences, which the slope in front of those fences is essentially the slope of the dune, and the high point is the crest. It's just, I started thinking people weren't realizing that, and that they thought the fence was to keep them out, and that was the impetus for a social sciences study to see, what people think they know about management and what they actually know, and then hoping that can, sharing that with managers, that they can directly apply that. And so we found some really interesting results, mainly that taxpayers are actually a lot more willing to have their dollars go towards keeping people at the shore and keeping them safe than they are towards managed retreat, and that there's a very real disconnect in how people understand that plants in general stabilize dunes versus being able to actually explain how and why.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that understanding. I think that science without a trifecta of applied and outreach, it's limited, and so there's a lot more to do by doing a bunch of side projects and whatnot. But I think if your field is inherently applied, like any coastal field really is, if there's implications in a lot of the studies that we do for how we manage these areas, then it's, if you notice something like that, it's almost your responsibility to take that extra step. And so I'm happy to have been able to do that. And we did that with a high school student as well who did an incredible job. So yeah, I'm really excited for that study to come out and send it all over the place to people who didn't ask for it.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the second grader and the high schooler that worked with you, because that's important for people who are watching to know that, like, scientists are accessible, and like if you're interested in potentially pursuing a career in this, it's never too early to start trying to make connections with those researchers and maybe even working on the projects, right?
Yeah, definitely. I've come to really be shocked at how open our government organizations like the Army Corps of Engineers are to ecology in general. I always viewed them as a strictly cement organization, and getting to meet more of those folks at conferences like the one we're at today has been really eye-opening. It's a matter of resources and putting yourself out there, and I didn't think I would be studying dunes down the line, but here I am, and it's a path that I seem to have been put on.
Yeah. So tell us about your wind tunnel.
Yeah, so I read a wonderful study that was in 2012, Zarnetsky et al. In ecology, and they tested how different dune plants vary in capture efficiency of sand. And I read this paper, and they used a wind tunnel, and I was obsessed with it because I had the idea that I was very interested in this idea that plant shape feeds back on dune shape. So when I read this paper, I was like, wow, if they could have looked at the topography underneath the plants, they could have got at this question. But unfortunately, that wind tunnel had been torn down months before I started digging around. And also, there was no suitable wind tunnel in terms of the scale size that we would need that could test that in my area, anywhere on the East Coast that I found. And so I found funding that was in the wake of Superstorm Sandy for dune-related projects, and I applied with the notion with that either I would get the grant and we'd do it and we'd build this wind tunnel to do the research, or we wouldn't get the grant and that would be that. And we did get the grant, and we've had incredible support from Ocean County, New Jersey, where it's located, different organizations that have donated time and money, which has been really great. Again, how people want to help, it's just a matter of reaching out.
Yeah.
And so though we had a pretty good budget, I had never budgeted something that large before, and so I under-budgeted many things, and so we had over $10,000 in donations from different organizations. We had over 140 volunteer hours from different institutions, tons of high school students, and the high school students, as a reward for all their hard work, when they were there, would get to go in the wind tunnel, and I'd ramp it up to high speed, and they could tinker around in the wind tunnel with them getting blasted by wind. And so, yeah, we did that last summer, and we'll be redoing that study again this summer, again with all the high school students. And that wind tunnel, we're hoping other scientists will want to use it as well. So anybody that has a use for a 2-meter tall, 1-meter wide wind tunnel that can reach 27 miles per hour, it's publicly available, and this high school where it's located is dedicated to keeping it in use as long as researchers are using it. And so we have a second grant going through the Engineering Research Development Center, the Army Corps of Engineers, and it's to make modifications to make it even more sustainable in the future in terms of having everything there that a researcher would need to do their research.
That's awesome.
I'm really hoping that not only ecologists get in there, but even you could study how seeds are moving, how fungi are moving. You could test turbines. There's a ton of different things you can do in there.
That's great.
We're hoping to use it as a learning tool for the local high schools as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That if they're going to help, then they get something great out of it in terms of experience and inspiration. That's super fun.
And that group that did that 2012 study, Zarnetsky, Phoebe, has been really instrumental in kind of guiding me and helping me with that as well, their support.
That's great.
So, yeah, the scientific community and I think the non-science community, we all have the same goals, and it's a matter of linking us together. And I found that when I can get us linked together, it's been great, and I'm going to continue to try to do that.
So we'll switch gears a little bit now, and taking it back, let's talk about how you decided to become a scientist in general, and how you decided to become an ecologist, and how you decided to go to grad school.
Yeah, so I joked with those second graders I talked to that I was technically a 22nd grader, and that if you had asked me in second grade if I was ever going to be a 22nd grader, my mouth would have dropped to the floor, and I would have said, I'm not even going to finish high school. I just like gym class. As a second grader. But when I got to college, I I know I was always inherently drawn to being outside, and so I knew going into college I wanted to ultimately do some sort of job where I could be outside as much as possible. And so I naturally gravitated towards the sciences, but I actually didn't do very well on my introductory biology class final, and learning how to manage your time in college. I didn't do the best, and so I then was like, oh, I guess maybe I can't be a scientist. And so I floated in college a little bit, kind of without a home in terms of what my major would be. And then I finally came back to it. I was like, no, I'm better at time management now. I know what I did wrong, and then did really well. And I was actually a student athlete in college as well, and had athletic eligibility when I was graduating. And all the jobs that I was looking for wanted you to have that step further with a master's in terms of being able to do research. So I figured, let's kill two birds with one stone, and I went to get my master's. I wasn't planning on doing a thesis in my master's program, except when Superstorm Sandy hit. I'm from New Jersey, and so I was looking for ways to give back to my state. And the answer for what could I do that everybody couldn't do, like a cleanup, was that I could do a study to help us be better prepared for the next inevitable Sandy. And that initial study snowballed into a master's thesis and now into a PhD dissertation, and the Dune Goon.
The end.
Yeah,
or so the beginning.
I continue to work in it, and I really enjoy what I do.
It's fantastic. Yeah, I love that idea of that there was a moment where you realized you had something that you could give.
Almost, I feel like it found me, because I also only applied for PhD programs that were very close to the field site that I was working at in New Jersey, so I could keep getting at these important and applied questions that I was working towards, with the idea that even though they were very competitive, if that was the path I was meant to be on, that it would work out. And lo and behold, I'm University of Pennsylvania, and I think answering really interesting and important questions.
I would say so, yeah. And part of these interviews is, of course, talking about the fact that anybody can be a scientist, and we look different, and we have different backgrounds and different experiences. So what sorts of things that make you diverse, we're both women in science, that sort of thing, what sorts of experiences might you have had because of those diversity aspects, and how have they shaped your experiences as a grad student and as a scientist? Yeah,
I think it's a little intimidating sometimes to be a woman in science, but then I remember, no, I'm a woman in science. And I'm also the Dune Goon, and so when I get nervous, I try to remind myself of all the badass things I think I've done, and that helps. And I find that I'm very quick when somebody writes themselves off or says they can't, to point out the reasons why they can. And so I've really, if anybody approaches me for research, I'm more than willing to give them a shot, because I think that's a lot of what in any field, you got to be given a shot at some point to see if you can sink or float. And so I'm perfectly willing to work with high school students, and have found that they're wonderful, as well as undergrads. In a lot of ways, the high school students are a lot easier, but I love the field.
Mm-hmm. And along with that, again, you probably do a version of this quite a bit because you've talked to a lot of school students of various ages, but what would you say to a younger you, or someone like you that's interested in pursuing a science career and grad school and research? What sorts of things would you want to let them know they should be prepared to experience, or things that they should know going in, kind of thing?
Yeah, to a younger me, I would probably say, going into that Bio 101 class, that you should go to lecture, and that though you enjoy reading the pages that are assigned in the syllabus, that's supplementary. That's not all the info you need to know. And so that was my big problem. I stopped going to lecture, and I just read the book and loved it, and thought I was more than prepared because I knew the book very well, but didn't know the lecture material. So that was a hard lesson. So I would tell myself that, and I would also tell myself, I had another one. Give me a second, I had it.
That's all right. I'm sure all of the professors out there are like, yes, she said come to lecture.
Yeah, come to lecture. Oh shoot, I thought of one right away. I thought of two right away, that one and another one. What was it? I guess another thing I would say to a young me is that to be sure, or to any young scientist, to be sure that, you need to have a higher degree than college to do what you need to do. Because you are giving up a lot in terms of your time, your sanity, and the money that you could be making by, getting a master's or getting a PhD. And so I would say to be 100% certain that that's what you think you should be doing, and you have a real reason to be doing it before you do it. Because there's a lot of folks that, get PhDs and then don't use them, and it almost congests the whole job market in terms of how we hire people.
Yeah. But it's also, like you said, it's a lot of missed or otherwise used time or missed opportunity to be making money. And like there are tons of jobs that you can do in science and in research that don't require a master's or a PhD. And some people manage to do those jobs without even having a bachelor's degree. So it's all about like figuring out what fits for you, right?
Yeah, you don't have to have, at the end of the day, it's a piece of paper. And it's proof that you have the skills to be an expert in what you've studied, but most people have those skills in some capacity or area, and it's a matter of figuring out where you excel and realizing you can't know everything, and you can't know everything, and would you really want to?
No. That's too much.
So being able to realize where your expertise lies and where others' expertise lies and when you should ask for help, I think is a really important skill. Because you don't want to become a jack of all trades, master of none, because you're trying to learn everything. I think everything should be a community effort, not only in science, but in how we function. And so being able to recognize that and know when to ask for help or when to ask a question that is a no if you don't ask, that's really important.
Yeah.
And so I would tell young me already asked all the questions, I think. I've always been good at that, being from New Jersey and being taught to almost wheel and deal. But I would encourage others to ask more questions more often.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like people to know about you as a person, as a scientist?
Me as a person and as a scientist? Well, I like to wear 90s neon while I'm on the dunes because the windbreaker material of those clothes is great, and usually the pockets are mesh, so that's fun.
Pockets.
And that makes it so that I'm distinguishable on the dunes, so hopefully if people see me on the dunes, they know, oh, that's just the dune goon.
So your fashion sets you apart.
Yeah, but I've always been a bright person, and I think that we often set our limits, and that I like to push mine, and so that's why I think I do a lot of outreach, and it's because I enjoy it. And so I hope that everybody finds what they're really passionate about and they enjoy, so they can find and push their limits as well.
Nice. And this question is a little bit of a cliche, but we like to ask it because we're interested in the people that, come on here and talk to us. So what's next for you? What are you doing post where you are right now?
That's always the dreaded question to anybody at the end of an academic milestone. Mm-hmm. I have about a year until I defend. I'm very much looking forward to that. A lot has to happen in terms of me working very hard in the next year, as well as getting through this last field season, and hopefully no hurricanes foil that in the next month and a half or so. But I'm looking to stay in academia, I think. However, like I said, that I've been really shocked to find how willing our different government and NGO agencies are willing to work with scientists. So that's been really eye-opening, and I would really like to keep that line of communication open and engaged with those different organizations. Staying in research, staying outside, that's always been my goal. And so whatever capacity I can do that in and feel like I'm contributing, I'd be happy with. And so right now I'm looking for postdoc opportunities, but if the right job opportunity came along, I would try that as well, because I think I could be happy doing a number of things, and it's more of a matter of finding out, where I think I can best use my skills to be helpful.
Yeah, and that flexibility is always nice because you
Yeah.
don't want to be so set on one thing that you miss out on something.
I feel responsible to share the knowledge that I've gained
Yeah.
in all this time in academia. And so I'd like to figure out where I can best share that knowledge.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we'd like to thank you so much, Bianca, for coming and
Yeah.
talking to us. These are so much fun, and I
Yeah.
always like learning all about other people's research because, like, all ecologists are doing interesting things.
Yeah,
so.
thank you so much. The roving scientist is awesome. It makes me so happy to know that this is around and that people are actually listening.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So if you liked this video, don't forget to like it. If you didn't like this video, please share it with someone who would. And if you'd like to support the Roving Naturalist, remember to hit the
Roving
subscribe.
Naturalist.
Oh. Hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.